Morning, ladies and gentlemen. May I welcome you to the first edition of Summit FX, being organized in partnership with Ministry of Information and Broadcasting and Government of Karnataka. We would like to thank our partners, supported by Technicolor, Principal Partner Accenture, Dell, Epic Games, Associate Partner Autodesk, Aptech, Tech Mahindra, ICE, our co-partner DNEG, Jetline, STPI, Indian Gaming Society, our institutional partner. Today, we are on the fourth day of the summit. We will now begin our plenary 24 business session, Future Thought, AVGC, and the entertainment industry. This is rather an interesting session where we have panelists from all the verticals of the media entertainment industry who will throw light on the AVGC and the entertainment industry. May I have the privilege of welcoming our panelist, Mr. Blaise Fernandez, President, Indian Music Industry, Mr. Gaurav Gandhi, Director and Country Manager, Amazon Prime Video, Mr. Karan Bedi, CEO, MX Player, Mr. Manish Vyas, President, Communications, Media Entertainment, Business, and the CEO, Network Services, Tech Mahindra Technology, Mr. Puneet Misra, CEO, Domestic Broadcast, ZE Entertainment Enterprises, Mr. Siva Kumar Sundaram, Chairman, Executive Committee, Bennett Coleman and Company Limited, and Mr. Sridhar Rajagopal, Managing Director, Accenture Interactive. May I also invite our moderator, Mr. Manoj Vidwant, Global Head, Cable Media Entertainment, Tech Mahindra. May I request Mr. Manoj to kindly moderate the session. Thank you.
On behalf of a very warm welcome. This is really hoping to be the next 20 minutes of most amazing learning for all of and the participants. The conversation, what I thought would be we have all the fantastic panelists here. If I could go around the where we could kick off this session and all of you as industry leaders, what is AVGC industry itself, and what's the evolution that you have seen from your vantage point, specifically how have you seen that evolve as a part of request is, and I'll probably that's okay. Spend a couple of minutes, not too long, because I'm hoping a lot more interactive session. But to spend a couple of minutes, give your view on and then we could get into the details if that's okay. It's okay, Blaise. Can you start as industry? Fantastic to kick off the session with you.
Thanks, Manoj. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and well done, Viren and company, Nirja and company, for putting this together for the first time. So, Manoj, I'll probably start with the evolution of the industry, and I'll wear a hat that I've worn for 23 years of my life, where I ran Warner Brothers. So, in the year 2009, there was an iconic filmmaker who came to India and was and used India as a location for an iconic film. Okay, and I think that's the first time for me I saw the potential of the prowess that India has in terms of a destination, in terms of film tourism, and in terms of the potential to unleash this this huge catchment for in terms of film production and special effects. A rising tide raises all boats. Rather than focusing on this sector in isolation, I think the larger context should be, okay, how do we get filmmakers across the board? And when I say filmmakers, I also talk of ad filmmakers. I talk of anybody in the creative industry to use India as a location. And when you use India as a location, the multiplier effects kicks in. There is film tourism, there is hotels who probably get a lot of businesses, the transportation business, and of course, the sector that we're discussing today. That's the first part in terms of industry. Globally, at any given time, what we see coming out in the public domain is just 25% of the pilots, especially in the TV industry, and I'm sure Gaurav will probably say it's the same for the OTT industry, but especially for broadcast, what you see on the broadcast networks around the globe is just 25% of what's produced. The rest 75% of the pilots never make it, but those pilots are created. And I was part of a team that actually did a study of trying to attract the creation of pilots, because every pilot doesn't get onto the network, but every needs to be made to tell a story to try and see whether the network will buy it or not. And when we did that feasibility study to see whether pilots can be produced in India because of cost efficiencies, et cetera, it was infrastructure that was a huge bottleneck. And I think what is important, and as I said, a rising tide raises all boats, okay, is to create that ecosystem given the locations that we have. We have snow, we have hills, we have ravines, we have beaches, we have plains for film ecotourism. And if you get that big bulk going, everything else will fall into place. That's the first part. In terms of that's natural, that's like in the open, trying to make it as easy as possible. In terms of physical infrastructure, I'm sure there are going to be opportunities to kind of create pilots in India because everybody needs to kind of get those cost efficiencies. And the moment you get that infrastructure going, especially with the states and the states working with CII, we probably have, again, a byproduct will be that everybody wants to create in India, should be able to create in India a one-stop shop. Where reference to the recorded music industry is concerned, which I now kind of work with the trade body IMI, I think the important point to make is, given the fact that locations are now going to be challenged in the new normal, at least till we get back to the new normal, how can the sector work in terms of creating music videos? Because it's not only about the song, it's not only about the lyrics, it's also about the video that's going to go out, and that is important. How can we collaborate together, working remotely? And I think these are the questions and answers that we need to kind of ponder upon as the session unfolds. These are my opening comments. Manoj, thank you very much.
Thank you, Blaze. I think rightly so, as a thought leader, having a broader picture definitely sets the stage. Gaurav, if I could move to you next and just give your perspective, probably not just from the Amazon video point of view, but the Prime Video point of view, but also some of the earlier avatars that you had.
Manoj, I think Blaze said the context really well. So I'll just sort of build on those things. I'll focus on two sectors, and pass the baton on. I think on the animation side, the industry has seen obviously some very interesting local animation that's been built out over the years. Whether it's characters like Chota Bheem or Motu Patlu and many others. But the reality of that is that 65 to 70% of our animation actually is business from overseas, and that remains one area that how do we sort of get the domestic sector going beyond that. And one of the challenges that's remained that sector is the fact that animation in general has been seen for kids and not beyond that. So I think the opportunity lies, and there's a big opportunity as the marketing segment matures, that animation itself, besides doing great character stories for kids, how can we broad base that? And India has shown some really good talent to create that, not only India but internationally as well. So that's on the animation sector. I think there's an opportunity there. I'll build on VFX a little bit more, and today, like in the streaming side, roughly about 10 to 15% of our work in any show is VFX led, and that goes much higher, maybe a quarter on certain shows. And of course, if a show is a period show like The Forgotten Army or a sports based thing like Inside Edge, it becomes even more. I think the opportunity really lies in us looking at how the growth in domestic content creation, not just in films, but also in streaming now, can boost that further. And I think, unlike the animation sector, VFX has actually been boosted mostly by domestic growth. And animation would have grown about close to 20%, my estimates, what I read last. On the other hand, VFX is growing at a faster rate, and a lot of that boosted by domestic demand. And I think, as much as we all dealing with the pandemic and working around that, for this sector particularly, there is an opportunity to build further, because, like Blaze mentioned, location shooting, crowd shots all become a challenge. How can this sector fundamentally solve a lot of problems for content creators and be able to sort of unblock that content pipeline which is stuck? So I really feel that both sectors have sort of their unique places they're in. On the VFX side, we have a great opportunity to sort of build out. And as content creation, it's virtually at a rapid pace. Players are investing heavily on the streaming side and the film side and TV side. I think there's a big opportunity there. So I'll pause there, Manoj, to pass the baton on and then build on these points as we go forward.
Thank you, Gaurav. I think a couple of key points which we'll build on, which is, I think, animation, especially going beyond kids, which is probably one area we've not seen in our market. And the VFX, the larger component as it, with the current challenges and going forward, how does it play a more meaningful role? I think those are things that we'll definitely want to touch upon. Thanks for this, Gaurav. Karan, if I can come to you and, your quick comments on the same.
Thanks, Manoj. Guys, for being on audio and not video, because there was a little bit of confusion as to the timing on this session with my calendars. I'm not in front of the computer, so I hope I'm fully audible. So actually want to build what Gaurav in that the demand for these sectors, AVGC as a whole, gaming, animation, visual effects, and comics, actually needs to be quickly for this industry really to be able to take off. It's okay for New Zealand with domestic market to base its entire sort of model on, but I think for kind of employment and value, I think the domestic has to kick in. And I think on that front, I think while definitely both films and of course streaming business to contribute quite actively to those domestic industries, uptake of both sectors, animation, are not quite to par. And I think that's because visual effects cost a lot of money. That's the reality of the situation. So as our the distribution waterfall from customers paying or ad rates going up to OTTs or broadcasters or distributors making money, that flowing down back to the producers, and then obviously from the producers to the VFX and anime providers. I think that chain is still got a lot of headroom to grow. Good gaming. I think that we haven't mentioned that till now, but I think that one has really taken off in India. It's still primarily a casual game market that's not so VFX heavy. You are seeing what we call mid-core gaming emerge very, very actively in India, and especially because as phones get more powerful, India is obviously a phone-first country. As phones get more powerful, mid-core games are becoming more important in that ecosystem. So as mid-core games, and then eventually what they call sort of hardcore games, which are like the very heavy graphics intensive games, start to come into play as I think phones and then and tablets and so on get more affordable. I think that's a sector that's really going to be very actively pursued. I think gaming is, we are in the gaming business as well, and we're seeing really sort of solid growth on that sector. So I think, my basic point being, as the domestic sort of media and entertainment sector starts picking up from a consumption standpoint, this will be a natural beneficiary. And I think that's what we need to focus on.
Thanks. I'll definitely want to dwell a little bit more on how you incorporated gaming as a part of your platform and seems to be gaining traction. So along the way, I'll definitely come back to you and ask, trying to merge the game behavior and bring that back into more video format and vice versa. Thanks for the quick view, Karan. Manish, if I and ask your view as a technology part, you see this from your vantage.
Yeah, no, thank you, Manoj, and thank you so much for having me on the call. I'm in many ways an odd man out because everyone here, my eminent panelists, are all based in India. I'm probably the consumer of everything that India produces, but I live in Dallas. And I want to, before I say anything, I want to take 20 seconds to thank my eminent panelists for creating what you guys create. The last 5 months, the difficult last 5 months, there have been two phenomena in our lives. One, I would say the connectivity or the telecom, which a business that I am very close to, has kept us alive and kept us going. And the other thing that has kept us going is content that has come, whether it is from Gaurav's stable, Patal Lok, or whether it is from Hotstar, Arya. I think it basically demonstrates that quality content can captivate people all across the world. And the underlying theme of that, in my view, was the manner in which this content has been delivered globally now. So to take a cue from what Blaise was saying, I'd like to, given the software and technology industry, we only believe in acronyms. So I thought of an acronym which is called AIM, which is really the whole notion of, given that the world now lives remotely, produces their and give shape to their talent remotely, because we leverage and utilize the technology available to us, largely software technology to the hilt. Animation clearly answers that question in a massive way. Storytelling has been a forte, so clearly something that India, technology production in India is obviously, now we are the world headquarters of R&D. And if we add the little element of music to make the animation made in India, created in India, but for the global market, with the twist of music, I think presents a brilliant opportunity. And that's my view as a user, as a consumer, rather than as a technologist. As a technologist and a service provider to this magnificent industry, and to your question, my view is we have always been a very deep, ardent follower and observers of the trends where our customers, our clients are focusing their energies on. And increasingly now, because technology is no more an enabler of operation, but it is an enabler of business, as we have seen in the last 7 to 8 years, it becomes very imperative for us that we start understanding what are the customers really looking for. And the last 5 months, if anything that I have done, and like many of you, I'm sure, is we have all spent time with our families, and my co-colleagues, my co-workers in my office have been my 11 and 9-year-old daughters. And observing them tells me what is in store for us in the future. One, it is very clear, like the gaming industry is showing, 54% of all gaming is now moved to mobile. As far as content consumption is concerned, I would say that the user created content will continue to dominate for a very long time, but with the level of sophistication that is needed, TikTok is clearly an example. And at the same time, the traditional media, but delivered digitally, like Shiva's brilliant brand, something that I can't start my day without, early morning here, I think also has a prominent play. So as the industry continues to run better in terms of more efficiencies, better um, operating models, as it adopts the technology and particularly software technology much faster, whether it is data, whether it is personalization, and we can delve more into that later, or as it looks to build new business models with the new delivery models, I think the future, what we can create out of India, contributing not just for the Indian market but for the global. I think, as they say in our part of the world, the future is very bright. So I remain an eternal optimist on how one, what one can create together in collaboration with the industry players.
Thank you, Manish. And we will definitely you firstly really appreciate you time. The fact that you are on this panel really tells us that not only are you very keen in terms of as a consumer, partner on an ongoing basis with all the parties. I think specifically we'll probably come back and touch upon how does 5G probably change this world as well. You with those specifics. If I can move to you, Puneet, and get your quick views, would appreciate that as well.
Thank you, Manoj, and thanks everyone on the panel to be here on the CII platform. I thought I'll probably first try and bring a bit of a perspective from the television side and then talk about the larger context that we are all part of. See, from the television point of view, if we look at, let's say, the general entertainment channels, roughly in a week, that would be about, give or take a few, about 4,000 hours of content every week that is getting created in India, give or take. Now, if I look at then the conversation we are having about animation and VFX, the contribution of that into this volume, let's say the number of shows that are getting made which have a contribution of this would be maybe 5%. Again, I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm just basing it on rough intuitive estimates. Within those shows, apart from the animation, the VFX piece heavy shows would have maybe maximum 30% time going to VFX, rest would be non-VFX actually. So if you really break it down, animation and VFX as a volume out of those 4,000 hours of content every week would be as a percentage sub 5 percentage points. Yeah. So the volume that is getting created in the space of video content, which is the largest volume content, which is television, is very small from the point of view of animation and VFX. And that has manifestations in other places. If you look at the number of people who the industry is going to create this for television, they would be counted on not two, but perhaps one hand of the fingers on one hand. So the supply side also obviously is driven by the demand side. And therein, I think, lies the big question that while we are talking about becoming a much larger player, what Karan spoke about, that if we are not in a place where the local demand or local consumption is feeding into the industry, then these parts of the industry are actually then going to be fringe players, and we might have hopes and visions of becoming global players. But honestly, it will be for those few articles which are written which says that, for Game of Thrones, the dragons were made in India. We really don't want that. We want to be players like we are in IT globally, where you have a significant market share. And I think that is where, again, coming back to the TV world, I would want and hope that we can actually integrate a lot more of these technologies into the current volume of content that we create. It's that proverbial 10,000 hours of expertise which can get built here. I mean, the Beatles became the Beatles because they were practicing for that many hours in Germany doing those shows that they were. If we don't build that internal volume demand, if we don't build that practice of the craft, if we don't bring the benefits of scale and hence cost into these parts through the world of current high volume video consumption production ecosystems, I feel that we are still living in hope. And I think that's something that I would want as a player in the industry to work towards, to lift if we can, because let's face it, this does impact very positively on many aspects, whether it is on creativity, whether it is on flexibility on production, whether it is on flexibility in post-production, whether it is creating very grand visuals which are possibly very difficult to do otherwise. There is so much more that with all this we can bring to our viewers. And the fact is the viewers are getting to see more and more of the global content, and that will seep further into the country. So I think that's a challenge as well as an opportunity, to use a cliche. But I think we are doing precious little to actually make it of that scale. Currently, I think there is not enough that gets done by all of us players to make this shift happen. And I think that's where I link to what Blaze was saying. While there is this need for in the internal local consumption and what we can do to make it grow, what will help, of course, and this is helping the P&Ls of the players who will come in this market, if they can also get the support of the infrastructure, not just of the let's say the country's infrastructure, but also the setting up of infrastructure for these kind of businesses to be facilitated by the government, then between local demand which could get met, as well as, let's say, very high end, maybe lower volume, but really high end content also getting created, you're then straddling both ends of the spectrum. And that's how the industry could sort of look at growing. So that's one thought. And my apologies if it sounds a bit more cynical or contrarian, but sitting where I am, I see that not much has changed in the last decade for the television industry in terms of, I mean, it's baby steps, if you ask me, on what I see getting made for television at least. I also wear the hat of being part of various industry forums from the broadcast side. And there is one thing which is happening which can help in this journey, which is that we are seeking infrastructure status for this entire industry from the government. There is good movement that has been happening. We have support, of course, from the MIB, but I believe there is also support from the finance industry. And we are currently shaping a paper which we are going to submit to the two ministries, which builds the case for granting of this status to the entire audiovisual broadcast distribution industry, which then can hopefully make it easy for more investments to come in. Fact is, there hasn't been any major investment in these areas as far as what I'm seeing from the TV side. There may be from the gaming side, and there may be from some global tech supply, which is with few people. So that's something that I personally am keen to drive. We are also actively evaluating, of course, the newer technologies, the whole AR, VR piece. And I know that some parts of the content creation world, the news industry, the sports businesses are also using that. But really, again, if big volume has to come through, this needs to then get embedded also in the TV ecosystem. And we do the reality shows and you do the GC shows that you do, but many of these technologies can bring in a lot of excitement into the day-to-day content that is getting created. We are struggling again on costs there, but they're not out of whack. And I can see in the very foreseeable future, a lot of that should start coming into television as well. It's not out of whack, but it will still be limited in the volume that will get created, because while it may not be out of whack to try and do a few, but to do it on scale, costs will have to come down. And Karan did talk about that aspect. So those are the few thoughts that I had in mind. In the next 5 years, look, we all know the video consumption and video generation will more than double. But how do we ensure that all the technologies that we are seeing come around us, how do we bring it to bear to become an integrated part of this whole video production ecosystem? And that it doesn't stay with what it has in the last 10 years is really what I think all of us will need to work upon. That's what I would say as opening comments, and hand it back to you, Manoj.
Thanks. And what I quickly pick up, actually, from a TV lens, contributor so far, hard for this infrastructure status industry, which will help. Looking at augmented reality, if I just term it as extend, to become part as well of the ecosystem. So a couple of questions that I'll follow up, but thanks very much. So if I can get your opening comments, please.
Good morning, Manoj, and thank you, CII, for this opportunity. As I said, Manoj, I'm an outsider to the AVGC sector. So my views would be as a consumer and obviously as an industry person, both traditional media as well as advertising and communication industry, which is yet to fully leverage the power and potential of the AVGC to add value to a set of our offerings. So when we say AVGC sector, we are talking of four very different industries. They are undoubtedly complementary at one level, but each one has its own growth trajectory based on first consumer and industry demand and evolution, and of course supported by government and regulatory support. The industry has certainly come a long way from adding special effects or animation to the entertainment industry. What started as largely as a B2B industry, that is providing special effects to movies and kids content, we all started with this Tom and Jerry. It has now given birth to end-to-end standalone, full-fledged B2C solutions in gaming on consoles, desktops, and now ever increasingly mobile first. And as Karan calls it, mid-core games are the hardcore games. So it is one of the sectors, obviously, which gained tremendously in the lockdown in terms of definitely consumer engagement. It solved a pain point. The meet and greet as social animals, we seek company. And one of the simplest gaming app, Ludo King, I believe, gave respite to the lockdown frustration of the families, especially large dispersed family in the city, in the same city, who are unable to meet. It brought a lot of families together, easing the stress of staying in confined indoor spaces. So the role is not merely an animated virtual background on our screens, Zoom or MS Team calls. Advertising and marketing, for especially I guess for the team in the TV industry, of course Puneet will know this better, but the role of animation was I think was a kind of savior in running ads in the initial days of lockdown, because shooting with people was not possible. The message had to be delivered, and I guess animation came to the rescue. And increasingly, it will have some more effects as we go forward. On gaming industry, obviously, I believe budgets of creating and launching games by big players like Konami are so large. They're larger than the Hollywood movie budget. And now for last 15 years or so, I believe it's a globally 150 billion industry. So that means it gives you the scope of the size and how it will evolve, because your question is that how it's likely to evolve. So even in industry, India, I believe that today it's the gaming is 6,000 crores, but estimated to be 25,000 crores in 25. But I don't know. As I said, I'm not an expert. The rise of smartphones, obviously, and all of you have already spoken about it. The PUBG game, which recently banned, I was told that had a revenue of 22,000 crores. So there's a huge base of gaming, even within social media. Farmville, a game on Facebook in 2010, actually played a big role in adoption of Facebook among housewives. So the advertising, in-app purchases. See, all my points of view will be from advertising industry, as I said. So advertising, in-app purchases to progress the game, skipping levels, if you have to pay, all this are going to evolve and change. And whether it's 3 rupees, 5 rupees, but value per consumer for this industry is definitely set to grow. Then animation and VFX, as we all know, has evolved from merely a special effects for movies, shows, and news coverage to being the first port of soundboarding of any idea. I believe simulation is now the state of art to testing any new development before moving them into real life scenario, be it the flight training for training pilots to augmented reality game, which came some years back, like the Pokemon Go and all. And most interestingly, the recent graduation ceremony at IIT Mumbai a few days back, where the replica avatars of the students receiving degrees from replica avatars of chief guests, the dean and professors, is a brilliant innovation seen during the COVID times recently. The last part is comics. Yes, it's important because comics provide the storyboard and the visualization. The inspiration comes from the comics and characters. Essentially, I will feel that this is comics and the characters and visualization is the base of storytelling, which has actually contributed to, we can't forget it. This is what has and have helped us imbibe the rest of the tools of AVGC. Our own comic character, Common Man, has been there for many years. And this standard band, if you all remember one thing about Times of India, the Common Man stands up. These are some of my opening remarks, Manoj, on the subject. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us a breakup of the four subjects. Rightly said, Common Man is an everlasting. Just to pick up on one point, I'll come back to you, Siva, a little later on. Some of the storytelling and where does this subsect of but that probably is something that I'll come back along the way. Thanks for the opening comments. And if I can sum up perspectives.
Great. Thanks, Manoj. So Manoj, I think very, very interesting to see all the panelists talking about the India view in general, giving the holistic perspective of what is working and what is not working. I would want to take a slightly more global view and give a perspective of what we are seeing from a global perspective. Obviously, we see the industry, evolving from the video, movies, animation to immersive 3D content production. And we saw this coming a couple of years back. 2 years back, we acquired a company which is called Macavision. It's a leader in computer-generated imaginary, and a company which is actually doing fantastic in the auto segment. We have seen it getting nominated for some of the Emmy Awards for the special VFX effects which it has created this year in 2020. What we see is in the immersive 3D content production, seeing the impact of this coming to alternate industries, and that's what I really want to talk about. So for example, in the very recent past, immersive learning is one of the key concepts that is emerging. Learning is becoming a big industry by itself. And I'm talking about industries which are not consumer facing. I'm talking about industries which have more enterprise relevance. So industries like oil and natural gas, power plants, energy segments, infrastructure, high-tech industry, and all of that. So seeing the impact of immersive learning coming in there, which is quite big. In fact, recently we were working for a major oil and natural gas player, and one of the things which has got operations spread across multiple countries, the organization which is in fact trying to modernize their entire refinery, the entire workforce, and introducing concepts like IoT in every single thing. Now, the interesting thing is when you introduce a concept like IoT, you need to have a person right from marketing all the way to a person who's working in oil rig, understand the concept of IoT and apply it in the right segment and way. How do you train such staff which is far diverse across some people sitting in office, some people who are sitting in fields? How do you really promote these concepts? And one of the things that we realized is classroom training is obviously ruled out. So how do you make it more interactive, immersive for these individuals? I think some of the panelists talked about gaming concepts, and that is something which we picked up, concept of serious games, looking at a mechanism by which, for example, you can go to an alien planet on a spaceship, collect the different artifacts from a museum on the different concepts of IoT, apply that to your day-to-day life, learn from it, apply that to your day-to-day life. What we realize is when you create such concepts, you need to have the knowledge of the industry, you need to have the knowledge of the learning industry, you need to bring in the gaming concepts, you need to bring in the entire storyboarding, the experience, the technology, all of that together. And suddenly we see that entire industry exploding quite a bit. And not only that, we are seeing it getting applied to areas like hazardous situation where accessibility is quite thin. You can't have people coming and testing out how do I repair a machinery. How do you introduce these concepts and make people learn about how to repair certain things in a hazardous condition? Finally, one interesting advancements that I'm seeing in this area is what we are seeing is a volumetric capture. And this relates to the industry that we are talking about. Something interesting that we saw coming from the National Theatre in UK, where we work collaboratively with them. Some of the artists who are doing limbo, these are Caribbean UK artists doing limbo, form of a dance. We got them to the studio, and using almost 190, 200 cameras, we recorded their entire motion and all the movements, and in a way created a hologramic effect, which we could potentially take it to the audience, a theater audience, who were able to experience these artists from close quarter, 360-degree from all angles, and creating, using that as a new experience, supplementing their own theater experience. So very interesting movement taking place globally, right from the concept of applying the serious games all the way to what I would say the volumetric capture.
Completely need a very interesting perspective, which is how do we leverage this industry outside the industry? And like you made, be it oil and gas, learning, and especially using augmented reality, extended reality. That's something probably I'll come back to you with some specific queries, but a really interesting perspective. Thanks for that, Sridhar. And thank you again, panelists, for your opening remarks. If I can just go back to a little bit of deep dive comments that bunch of at the opening. The question that comes to my mind is this a bit of a chicken and egg story? I mean, we talk about the need clearly for this industry to grow, this to become front and center of plate, whatever we call it. But as business owners, and my question probably will go more specifically to Gaurav, Karan, and Puneet, is there a lack of investment, lack of risk, lack of ROI seen in, say, a VFX, making animation mainstream, especially from an India perspective, and as business owners and as clients of this sector, to do more of this? And after you respond, I'll definitely want Blaze and Siva to comment on the same. But Gaurav, if I can open with you, from a demand point of view, why do you think this hasn't happened a lot more than what it should?
I think, Manoj, I would say that, and Puneet can obviously give a better perspective on this, that the economic model of television at some level had a role to play in how much investment went behind content creation. But I would say in streaming's case particularly, and I'll come to what we are doing and how we see the industry. When you're actually, there are two parts to it. One is that you're creating a show for customers that be seen in 200 countries and territories, and you're creating it on services that have global shows sitting on it. You can actually are creating world-class content that actually goes across. Therefore, the standard of production and creation cannot be at any level lower. In fact, you got to set new standards. And Manish talked about whether it's Patalok or other shows from other streaming services. The fact is these shows are going world over, and so the way I see it now is that the investment going behind the production of these shows to create cinematic value, world-class productions happening now, and therefore the commensurate VFX requirements are happening currently. The past also has to do with like I said to you, the economic models there. Now, the other interesting part here, Manoj, is that we have the talent and the creative workforce to do all of this work here. And the answer on the VFX side particularly is the answer is yes, we do. And we are doing some of the very good work around here. Of course, let me give you an example. On any average show, there are 30 to 250 people required, depending on how much VFX is there in a show. 30 at a minimum and 250 at the highest level to actually work on graphics and VFX. We did a show called The Forgotten Army, which had a lot of it. period drama set up in war and all of that. We did some work outside India, but majority of that work also happened in India, right? And it was done, and the show in production values is comparable to anything that you see around the world. So I think we are seeing a lot more here now than was being done before. And to me, the economic models have a role to play, and not necessarily the intent or talent. So that's where I'll pause, and then we can come back to this a little bit more in detail. The second part I would say is on the animation side, since we talked about both. I think the question again there is that look, the traditional general entertainment channels have virtually no kids programming there. The kids programming was moved to the kids stations, which were in an industry which was given largely through a subscription on advertising revenue and not subscription revenues. Therefore, the investment you could make behind kids broadcasting was limited again. And kids streaming is now taking place a little bit with Woot Kids and so on. But again, it's too little at this point in time from a point of view of input going in to really, make the sector grow from domestic demand.
Manoj, I think this is a good segue for me to come in because Gaurav has pointed out exactly what is the big challenge, and I'll dwell on that. It is economics which trumps everything. If you just look at the cost of some of these shows which we are talking about from a television perspective versus the regular television shows, the cost could be 3 to 5 times higher, depending on the intensity of the VFX and graphics and so on. Whereas the revenues would tend to be obviously driven more by the platform revenues for every 10 seconds and not so much because that show cost you more. It's not cost plus revenue, right? You get the ratings, you might get revenue. But the challenge for the Indian broadcast industry actually is that we are supported a lot more by advertising than subscription. But even on the advertising, I mean, we all know the advertising percentage contribution of advertising. I mean, if you look at the total, it would be, let's say 0.3% or 0.4% of GDP kind of number goes into advertising. You look at countries like Indonesia, that number itself is 0.9. So there is per se, even advertising, which is the larger chunk for us currently, there's a challenge. Then you look at the subscription side, that's barely 1/3 of the revenues for the overall, for the broadcast players. And the ARPUs for television in the industry, if it is $100 or $80 a month in the US, it's $3 in India even now. And we are currently actually facing challenges on even that part, on the subscription side. And as you're aware, there are cases running in the courts on debates on that. So if there is a constraint on revenue side, that automatically means constraints on the amount of money that gets spent on creation of that content. It's absolutely as simple as that. And that is where I think we have to, as a country, realize that if we allow for market forces to play out, because the demand from the consumer is not of saying that I don't want the world's best, they do. Let the market then figure out how do you grow your business in a way that you can give better and better quality and manage your P&Ls. And that's how then the whole ecosystem will continue to get better and better and better. And I think that's the single biggest constraint, not the quality of people, not the quality of storytelling, not the quality of technology, nothing of that. I think that's the unlock. And I think what is probably not getting understood is that both from the capability of this industry to build serious global dollars to come in, because we can create that quality of content, as also the ability to build soft power for India and India as a culture globally. There is a huge amount of missed opportunity, and yet I think the ecosystem around us is almost focusing on much smaller aspects of the whole equation, where I think our efforts are misplaced in trying to, solve for things which actually are not problems that existed in the country. We have a thriving television industry, 800 channels, growing. We have good demand from our consumers. They are seeing more and more global content, so their aspiration is more. why would there not be a push for all of us to give them that? The only reason is that the economics of it has to start making more and more sense. And that is where we have to let open market forces play out. If the open market forces play out and there's willingness for the advertiser to pay and there's a willingness from the consumer to pay for it, it will automatically move because that's how market forces operate.
So if I sum up, like you're saying, it's probably not so much to do with the demand because the consumer is expecting the best, right, of whatever content, but it's more to do with the economics of it. Can you get the ROI? Sense to get into this, probably really thick and deep. And at least today the answer is no. But what I also hear you say, in some of these forces change, that remains a distinct possibility. So that's anyway that's glad to note. Kara, if I come to you on this, and probably Gaurav give a view of how Prime Video looks at it from a 200 country addressability. How do you look at this, and are you seeing the same as a constraints? Have you found some via media to make this a lot more mainstream on your platform?
So we go the other extreme actually, which is the aspect. Sorry, Karan, to you.
Yeah, so I'm saying, I think that, we're doing it Max. I think the one thing that you brought up, Puneet brought that up, was that we are seeing demand. So the way I think about it is that demand is backed by some of economic, right? Whether it is people willing to buy products and therefore advertisers willing to pay more, whether it is people willing to pay directly for content. And I think that our problem media, and I think OTT has changed that. I think OTT has changed that very considerably. TV also to an extent in the last few years when DAS finally rolled out. But traditionally, if you look at the structure of the entertainment back to the movie was the sort of the original, so to speak. We always had a very, very under monetized system. We never had enough screens, and I think that many have been part of many forums where we have complained at the hoops that you screens built up in this country. But I think that if you look at all things, monetization of traditional media in India has been very, very slow, which is why we haven't got the infrastructure to service this the demand that's even coming up now. Even on OTT, I mean, obviously Gaurav mentioned a couple of shows on their end. We've got a couple of shows on our end that are focusing heavily on some VFX-led logicals. We're seeing something pretty exciting. But again, it's a risk we are taking right now because we have some ability to take it. I think that you cannot the risk-taking appetite of the ability was not there. The capability to take risk on this kind of content was not there for the industry. So I think what's happened in the last few years, I would say just 3-4 years probably, is that, as you said, more global content is coming into the ecosystem. Consumers are now willing to pay it, good from, no, I wouldn't say good from bad, but willing to pay that premium a little bit for the high-end stuff. I mean, you've seen one Indian example of that. Bahubali is a film that a producer invested some 300-400 crores on. It would have been impossible for anyone to even think this before that happened. But now suddenly everyone's like, oh wait, there's scope there. There's there are rumors floating around about a couple of other big projects like this. So I think it all comes back to, as Puneet said, it comes back to that ROI. Are you able to invest in a way that consumers are willing to finally, like I said, either via advertising or via directly paying, being able to signal their demand, not just saying we want to watch it, but we want to watch it backed up by some degree of signaling. You look at Disney, right? I mean, they're a company. I mean, Disney may as well be called AVGC Limited. They literally their entire business runs on animation, visual effects, gaming, and comics. So I think the demand is very much out there. I think it's a question of being able to give consumers an appropriate media to get them to pay for it. And we are certainly, you know, we are willing to, we are taking a few bets in that space as well.
Sure, thanks, Karan. Blaze, if I can come to you, and I think just the opening comment that you made about, the rising tide now, and Karan made this point around Bahubali. So somewhere Bahubali was a risk, right? I mean, somebody sinking in few hundred crores for something that was never tested as a format. So again, is it still a chicken and egg? Is there a way, and from your vantage again, looking at the broader ecosystem, is there a better or a different way this can get tackled?
Manoj, I will give you an apples to apples example. Dawn produced in the 1970s and Dawn produced in this century. Same story, but the production values of Dawn in this century were like 20, 30, 40x of what was produced there. Difference being, when Dawn was produced in the 1970s, the cost of the ticket was 25 rupees. And the cost of the ticket when Dawn was produced in this century was anywhere between 300 to 700 rupees, dependent on where you saw it. I think to drive the whole ecosystem, we have to get into a subscription-based model or get the consumer to pay. And I think the theatrical business in India is a live example. No government interventions, no statutory licensing, no NTOs, free market economics. The waterfall is there for everybody to see. And look at the infrastructure it's created. Today, when you look at a multiplex, it's the anchor tenant in every mall. And that is a function of demand and supply. So till we don't get the consumer to pay, we're going to be struggling with this whole situation. That's the first part. Second part, look at America. Okay, all the big tentpole films, which are basically laden with special effects, have eventually come out from television. So I can speak for the fact that the entire DC stable has been made into films. Okay, but what gave the studios the power to kind of create that content is because they had a robust subscription cable and television industry in America. So it boils down to getting the consumer to pay. And I think the classic example is Dawn here. Now, till we get the consumer to pay, till we kind of move to that subscription-based ecosystem, how are we going to kind of survive? And therefore, while the local market is going to be very important, we've got to make sure that to kind of get those economies of scale and to get those kind of investments in, we will have to focus on getting exports. We'll have to be focused export oriented for this sector till we come to that where today we don't depend on exports and we can make consumers to pay. So at the end of the day, Infosys and all the TCSs still look outside of India because the kind of prices that they have maybe are not affordable to a number of companies in India. And that's my submission. At the end of the day, get the consumer to pay, do a subscription-based ecosystem, and you see that Dawn 1 and Dawn, the remake of Dawn.
That's a great point, Blaze, and the difference is there. Yeah.
If I could come in to just build on Blaze's point, on a lighter note, he talked about the subscription economy. Today, in our homes, what we pay for a week of tomatoes to be consumed in our home is what we pay for the television for the entire month. And roughly that's equal to watching 40 movies a month. And you pay for it equal to about a week's tomatoes consumed in the home. That's the equation.
You'll probably end up paying for more at this rate.
Yeah. Completely agree for Puneet. And I think if the government is serious about making this an employment generation sector, okay, I'll just give a small example. GDP contribution, most emerging markets are 3 to 7% to the national exchequer. Okay, in India, we're just about struggling to touch 1%. And that's because you've got these price caps, and these price caps have to go for this kind of, to kind of, let the waterfall flow.
Sure. No, that's a great point. And see if I can come to you and probably a slightly contrarian view. End of the day, Dawn, the first one was as successful more than the sequel. Now, therefore, is it really the story, and therefore does VFX to a great extent and everything else become an embellishment, and can we do without it? It's almost like, and it's a wrong forum to be asking this question, but it's also important to know how do we therefore tackle that, and how do we bring it front and center again. So from your perspective, Siva, as a storyteller or as a narrative, how does this come in, and how does this change?
Thanks, Manoj. See, adaption is a function of engagement. Engagement is a function of how entertaining the offer is. And how entertaining something is about how differentiated the offering is. Now, differentiated offering comes when you create something. Whether you leverage technology, you don't leverage technology, the audience has to sit up and take notice. It has to be disruptive. The industry has to focus on solving pain points and identifying need gaps. And obviously, COVID-19, as we all understand, has opened up several of them. Therefore, engagement defines economics and not the other way around. The cart cannot be before the horse. For example, I don't see movies, but I saw Avatar long back. Maybe that's the movie I saw. So the movie Avatar and Bahubali, as we just discussed, is a great example where the horse pulled the cart. Engagement and entertaining content got the economics going. Your engagement has to match that of the tomatoes if you want to get more money out of your consumers. So it is all the question. Now, how much of you see? I'll give you an example. Recently, in a TV show in the US, and I'm sure Manish had seen this, there was a great visualization in the US TV to visualize the height of the flood water. Why is it necessary to evacuate when as instructed? So when we say it has reached 3 feet, people say, why do you have to evacuate? Because the time it takes for 3 to 6, 6 to 12 is so fast that when you see it in an augmented reality next to the TV anchor and suddenly it bursts open. So it is terrifying and it jolts you to action. It drives home the point. It drives. So therefore, the question is technology for not for the sake of technology, whether it's VFX, it's whatever it is. As I said, economics cannot drive entertainment. Entertainment, engagement, and disruptive innovation. How do you jolt and make the consumer sit up and take notice? If you don't have tomatoes, you will sit up and take notice. So the same logic, fundamental logic, applies to everything in life, and certainly to this sector, which you're talking, AVGC sector, which we are talking about today.
Thanks, Siva. Again, great point about engagement and entertainment. And you mentioned technology, and I'm going to cross over to Manish to understand two things, Manish. And I would have loved to actually take two separate questions, but I'm going to bundle them. A lot of where this industry and M&E overall, the monetization is a function of how much you are able to personalize and make that content relevant. So question number one is, as a technology partner, how are you playing the role of that? And second, I think one of the points Puneet made is if some of the market forces change, we are going to see a dramatic shift. And the word that popped in my head was 5G. And Tech Mahindra has made significant investments. You led that business, you lead that business on the 5G front in India. So if you can take both the questions one after the other and just explain to us or help us understand both of them a bit more, that'll be.
Sure, Manoj. No, absolutely. But it's been a fascinating conversation, and I must say that as everyone has been talking, when Sridhar was talking, I was taking a small note and said, whenever you give me a chance to speak, I'm going to take something from Sridhar. When Gaurav was talking, I said, no, I like that point. When Puneet was talking, of course, Shiva with his one-liners is a legend. So each of his word is like worth taking. But then Blaze again said something to me which became almost religious. And I must say that technology or no technology, and I know my fellow technologists will probably kill me for saying this, I still prefer the original Dawn of 1970s. There is no other winner than that one. And with all due respect to the Dawn 2 maker, but the Dawn is gone down. But that's on a lighter note. So your question on personalization, look, I think we've already seen, haven't we, the remarkable benefit that understanding the nuances of data, and harnessing that data to convert into meaningful deliveries or meaningful results. I think we have already seen that in the business of social media. To a point where it is almost extremely controversial, right? In India, in US, in the public domain, everywhere. So we have already seen that what it can do, right? I mean, if you leave the controversy out for a minute, personalization and hence data and intelligence can be a game changer, right? Well, maybe my English is wrong there. It has been a game changer, right? Already. However, the industries that have already felt that personalization are things like social media. Like a friend of mine was a few hours ago saying, you better be careful on what you follow on Facebook, because that damn thing starts following you, right? Increasingly, it's already happening in the manner in which in my experience with, for example, Hotstar or with Prime and Netflix, it may be different, but it nevertheless is beautiful because of the way they have started understanding who me and my household is, right? To some extent, if not entirely, there are limitations there. But the industry where I am actually fascinated by what personalization can do is gaming, right? In fact, the data that that kind of is in your face, that says that the gaming, particularly the electronic gaming, is bigger than, and I hope this data is right, and I'm not quoting something wrong, but because it is unbelievable, it kind of caught my imagination that this industry is bigger than the music and the movie industry and the professional sports broadcast industry combined. Even if that data is not correct, the point is it is a very massive industry, and yet the level of personalization that can happen in that industry is massive. For example, imagine that today, as a particular game starts understanding a user and starts defining and with AI start changing and appreciating the kind of needs that a gamer has, including who are the fellow gamers who are very similar to that, it has a massive impact. In fact, there is Electronic Arts that publishes this report that said that one can have a 20 to 25% positive impact in terms of revenue and the yield from these consumers from personalization. On the other hand, I think there is a very big social impact that can also happen, because people will start getting to work with each other of similar ilk, if I may. That can happen out of personalization. Now, I think the cork has not yet been opened of this bottle as far as impact of personalization on the gaming industry, particularly, while the other industries, there is still a massive room, a huge headroom to grow. I think where your question about where we are coming from, and I'll talk about 5G in a moment, is we believe that, and I did briefly allude to this point earlier, that software, particularly software powered by data, and of course, the machine learning, cloud, networks, and we'll talk about network, I think is all going to become the business of the media industry more and more than ever before. It already is, it's going to become even more. And because we are in the business of software, no marks for guessing why I am excited at 1 a.m. in the morning. I'm absolutely pumped about this. So that's part one. 5G, Well, look, this picture, as they say in one of those Shah Rukh movies, the picture abhi baki, right? Because 5G promise is absolutely earth-shattering, not just from the tenets of bandwidth and latency and throughput and flexibility. The fact that the 5G is going to be a platform for innovation, right? Many of these things that we are talking, whether what Puneet is talking, what Blaise is talking, what Sridhar is talking about, in many ways is we are not using the word 4G at all. But I can't imagine that the kind of explosion that we have seen could have happened without 4G, right? In many cases, the amount of content that a roadside, peddler in Mumbai, who's probably selling bananas on the roadside, but is while waiting for customers is watching an entire movie called Dawn on his small movie screen, on his small screen is possible because of the network. Now that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? The deep end of this is with 5G, as the flexibility happens. For example, if I may say that your particular screen, Manoj, is not exactly the sharpest right now because the network in your apartment probably is not the best at this point in time. Imagine if everybody now knows, the network knows that Manoj is the moderator of this session. Doesn't matter if you blank out Shiva or Manish, you can't afford to blank Manoj. The network needs to know. Today, the network cannot know that. If this, God forbid, if this event suddenly gets impacted by network, all of us will feel bad. But unfortunately, the network company is not going to feel bad because they don't even know that something is going to go down. That will change with personalization on 5G, or can change. Let me put a qualifier, because it's not an automatic switch on, switch off button. You got to write and you got to curate and architect software around it. So I think there is an immense opportunity out there to bring 5G to the bear, not just at a network level, but at a platform of innovation. I just want to sum up my point by telling you this story about, I was speaking at a advertisers and marketing managers event in Mexico, and I asked them, do you believe that 5G can make an impact in your life? And this was about a year and a half ago. Nobody raised their hands, and I was not surprised, disappointed, but not surprised. So I said, okay, how many of you believe that your life changed when iPhone happened in 2007? And everybody raised their hands. I said, brilliant. Now tell me, what did Steve Jobs name his first product as? Right? And they said iPhone. I said, no, iPhone what? And the answer was iPhone 3G. If you remember, iPhone 3GS, which in my view was a tribute to the network called 3G. Was a tribute to the point that without 3G, my phone is not as powerful. The rest, as they say, is history. So imagine with 5G coming in, everybody's business is going to dramatically change. I think it is not a mere buzzword and a hype. I think it is indeed something that can potentially change many things. So that's where I am all pumped and excited, because the data, machine learning, and 5G, I think, is a combination that can be lethal and can be hugely a needle moving event in our life.
Thanks, Manish. And I know for a fact, 5G and network, we can have your attention for the next 2 hours, forget the next 20 minutes. It's very, very insightful. And Sridhar, if I can come to you, and you mentioned, about the learning parts, and as Accenture Interactive, or as an interactive business in itself, specifically draw out a bit of a roadmap. How does this cross-industry play, beyond M&E play look like for you? And how do we sort of gear up for that? Because again, like we see from a lot of other comments, it still remains a demand-supply question. So are you also scaling up the supply side from your end, your partner ecosystem, and how are you seeing this play out?
I think very, very interesting question, Manoj. And I mean, I just, before I answered this question, I was just reflecting on some of the comments from the previous panelists. I think the point that Manish, Dawn remains as my favorite movie as well. Manish talked about something very interesting, personalization. And I do believe whenever we are talking about the new world, personalization driven by data is going to be relevant in every sphere of what we do. Shiva talked about engagement driving economic model. I really believe when we look at interactive and when we are looking at the businesses evolving, I think in the last few years, we have looked at technology driving business, we have looked at industry processes driving business. Uh, but I think what we are currently seeing is engagement and experiences driving business. And that's where uh, the point that you mentioned about what do I see coming from media and entertainment industry. Uh, one thing which I see is it is at least 5 to 10 years ahead in terms of the kind of effects it can produce and the impact it can have on the multiple industries. I'll just take some examples of sports because that's where we are seeing some good impact. One is obviously the enterprise segment, where we are seeing significant impact on one side. Sales and marketing is another area where we are seeing, especially on the retailers, where people are looking at how do I take some of these stores, the brick and mortar stores, virtual, give them a full perspective of what the shopping experience looks like. How do I integrate the actual shopping experience with that and make it work, right? So that's a second segment that I have seen. Uh, Even from a learning perspective, something interesting that is coming up, especially in the current times when we look at scenarios where the loads on the healthcare providers, insurers is going up, where call centers are getting flooded with calls, and those people need to be trained about how do I really handle the customers coming on the other side? How do I pick up the call? People who are angry, people who have different tones, how do I really look at that? We are working on creating virtual augmented environment where we can teleport some of these call center operators, uh, understand how do they handle these calls, understand the modularity of their voice, the tone of the voice, analyze that through the AI, which Manish talked about, and then look at are you responding the right way or should you be doing different? So it's an enhanced form of training that we see. More interestingly, when I look at the engagements, right, and Shiva talked about engagements, I found some very nice conversations that are happening in the recent past, especially in the sporting industry, which has probably hit the most with the pandemic effect and people not getting, people fans not getting a chance to go to the stadium. How do you really create the right level of experience for them? And obviously, one of the interesting things now, whether you talk about football, whether you talk about rugby, whether you talk about cricket, whether you talk about Olympics, one of the interesting things that is going to remain for next 24 months is how do you visualize that experience from the eyes of the fan and also from the eyes of player and create that experience with the right level of personalization. So building in the culture of the place where the event is taking place, could be Dubai, could be some place in Europe, wherever, right? How to bring in the culture of the place? How do you build in the culture of the people who are watching the event? Look at the audience, and when I look at the audience is very interesting. I mean, most of the audience today, we are talking about Gen Zs and millennials, hyper personalized audience. How do you create the tribes for them in the right way so that they remain engaged? While sports can be a major event, they would want to imagine that if I'm going to a soccer event and going to be spending about a month in a particular city, how do I enjoy the city for that 1 month time period, getting immersed there, understanding the music there, understanding the fashion there, understanding what do I need to buy there, what kind of communities I need to be, what kind of programs I need to be. So creating all these effects within a platform, experience and technology driven platform, I think it becomes the key. Defining the day in a live scenario, looking at creating different experience zones, right from the game experience to shopping experience to communities, all of that, creating those arenas and making that work in the right form. We are seeing, great conversations taking place with our clients in those areas. So I think one is a very, very serious concept, uh, which is the enterprise side of the world. Consumer side always remains, gaming always remains, but we are seeing this new segment, which is in some ways the the experience is redefining the business model of how do you really engage in a newer way and create the market.
Thanks, Sridhar. I think, again, very interesting examples that you gave about sports, aligning to the culture of the place while you do this. Also the sort of call center agent, right? The virtual mode, how can all of that happen? That sounds really exciting. And with all of us working remotely and continuing to do so for some more time, that I think will just continue to improve as we go along and can even remain steady state as we get back to what the new normal. So very interesting. Thanks, Sridhar. I'm actually going to pause for a few questions that have come in. Unless there are any quick comments from the panel, I can get into the questions. Question for you is coming in saying, do you see Prime Video India or international creating content that is on par with Avatar?
I think I would answer that question by first of all saying absolutely at an overall level, that's the direction we are all getting into. And as you may be aware, like Prime Video is already working on globally on Lord of the Rings and so on. So the big series are being worked on. But I would answer it a little differently, Manoj. I would say that just when multiplexes arrived and different kind of films and different genre of films, different quality of films started happening in the theatrical business, streaming is doing a lot of that to the series world, right? We talked about personalization, but another part of that is segmentation fundamentally. You are now able to create content for the right segment of audiences, and you are able to do stories you could not be told in the world before because you couldn't segment on broadcast, right? And therefore the economic model is also changing and so on. So period, sci-fi, horror, thrillers, action, like the whole genre spectrum is coming up. We couldn't tell those stories in the past in India, and because we also in our broadcast world never had premium pay. We already have basic cable, right? So while the US always had the HBO and so on, could have told the story because revenue came from subscription. In India, it didn't happen. So the answer to the question is in two parts. We are going to tell different stories and bigger stories and different and therefore use VFX as either enhancers or enablers in many cases. And second, the question specific answer is absolutely. We are definitely doing that. In fact, today we released a show called The Boys, which is a big global hit and uses a lot of that functionality as well today. So specific answer is absolutely yes.
Point you of choice, there was limited of that in the past. We are seeing multiple screens, multiple options, all of that, which is also facilitating a lot of the supply side. I have one question for Manish that's come in, and I would have in fact asked the same question. So Manish, you mentioned 5G, but will this be a real reality in India is the question, because the question also says we rarely see real 4G even today. So how do you see this playing out?
I think there is a will be or should be type of a question, this one. I will give you a point of view from the perspective of what it should be, right? Whether it will be, unfortunately, depends on many other factors. I think all this fascinating conversation last 80, 90 minutes is built around one thing. It is not built around what we want to do or the industry wants to do. It is built around what the consumers are going to make us do, right? I think what we have seen across the world is exactly the same. TikTok is a brilliant phenomena of what the users want. I mean, a 19-year-old is becoming a millionaire because of a concept that has just taken by storm. So it's a very, very lateral example, But in India, we are a very young country, a very vibrant economy. We have not seen the beginning of innovation. By the way, India is also, if COVID-19 and last 5 months have proven one thing, it has also proven that India is becoming more of a worldwide headquarter of everything software and R&D and what we can do. Keeping all of these things in mind, I think it is only about when, not about if, that 5G will be a reality in India, or for that matter, anywhere in the world. It better be, because if it is, whether it is 5G or 6G doesn't matter. Let's call it for now evolution of network to the very next plane, which is not iterative and small progress. It is a leapfrog moment in the industry. I think it will happen. It clearly will be a fascinating development. It will transform the digitization of the country, of the economy, of the social fabric, of the healthcare. All of that will be impacted, dominated. Video, they say, since everybody in this room is about video in one way or the other, the report I read says 80% of all data that will get transacted on a 5G network will be video driven. So there you go. Let's live a dream.
Thanks, Manish. And we can't wait for that moment to have crystal clear audio and a perfect video. So hopefully that happens pretty soon. A question that's coming in for Siva, and specifically from Times of India newspaper perspective. The question is, when do you see an AR version of Times of India coming into reality?
Thanks, thanks, and it's a very extremely interesting question. And obviously, I also learned a lot from the comments of each of the panelists. And my knowledge of 5G was confined to what I read in Economic Times. But Manish Vyas today, when he spoke, and I must admit that today his video is the brightest and absolutely clear today, and especially when he's speaking from across the world. Now, coming to your question. On when do you see a VR version of Times of India? See, we discussed Dawn as the movie just now. There was also another movie called Devdas, which was produced. First movie of Devdas was actually produced by New Talkies with K.L. Saigal. I have seen that, and there was a movie produced by with Dilip Kumar, and obviously Sanjay Leela Bhansali with Shah Rukh Khan. So the question is, with or without technology, each one of them had their own innate native appeal, right? So similarly, it all depends on the ability of the storyteller to engage, entertain, and create experiences. And therefore, what emerging technology the medium can leverage, the more the technological leverage, more compelling the experience needs to be for it to be economically attractive. So therefore, based on our business model today, it is not that if we leverage a VR, AR technology, the offering becomes far more compelling. It is you cannot blindly follow the fashion of the day. Whatever is your set of offerings, you need to create experiences, engagement, and entertainment in that forum. And it has to be seen that is there innate native appeal, and is the adoption of technology to the platform, is it conducive to create more economic value? First of all, more value add to the consumer, and therefore does it give more economic value as well? When there's a mismatch, you need to look at alternate forms of creating engagement and experiences. I don't think an Economic Times or Times of India is yet ready to leverage AR or VR. Till the technology emerges, it has to evolve much further. I hope it answers your question.
Thanks, Siva. I was visualizing the Minority Report movie when the question was being asked of how Tom Cruise was flipping through, some of those screens. My mind thinking of those. So one more question, and it's not specific, but Blaise, if I can address this to you, there is a lot of talk about AR, VR, extended reality. Is that something that is going to overtake VFX? Will that become lot more important than what we know typically as VFX? That's a question coming in.
Super question. I think it will all depend on infrastructure. So at the end of the day, whatever the creator makes has to be backed up by infrastructure. Okay. So, example, going back to cinema, first came Dolby, then came 3D, then came IMAX. So, if the infrastructure can support whatever new creations, it will exist. Storytelling will be the focal point, but the rest will be based on what's available in terms of infrastructure. So in terms of AR and VR, today we are struggling with call drops. Today we are struggling with doing a Zoom call. We've got to kind of go into audio and move out of it. Somebody says 3G. Sometimes when I go to visit my mother and go, I think it's still in the 2G. So, I mean, these are all great questions for great panels. But if the infrastructure is not there to support it, this will never happen. In the cinema, in television, HD came in, etc., etc. The infrastructure supported it. So the progression in storytelling was made.
Thanks. There were a few questions, but we are out of time. But once again, hugely appreciate this. I personally learned a lot, and thank you for the engaging conversation. Thank you again, CII, Biren, the entire team there to facilitate this. So really appreciate.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Manoj. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Manoj. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Manoj, for this very enriching conversation. On behalf of CII, I would like to thank each one of you for sparing your valuable time and engaging with us. We look forward to your continuous engagement with CII. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.